Yeah, well, we're a couple minutes after the hour here, so let's get started. Appreciate everybody logging in today. I'm Dr. Danny Klitsch with Redox. I'll be hosting today for our citrus solutions webinar series here. We're going to concentrate on set and drop prevention. So bloom sprains are coming up in a couple months. Just wanted to kind of get ahead of it, make some plans, see what we can do to try and set next year's crop the best we can, and start from there. I always think that that you know we can't. This is the first step we have where we got to start with flowers, and from then on we can't make more fruit after the flowers are gone. So this is start with your best foot. I hope we can talk about that today on how to get there and not here, right? So here's a big stress event we had a couple years back where it just dumped fruit off of the trees because of a big stressor. So we're gonna kind of address both those things of what can we do when we have tight buds and flowers on the trees as well as BBs, and to try and set that season up from the beginning to be the most successful we can. So that's our goal, to help make sure that bottom line at the end of the year is where it needs to be and that our yield numbers are up there. So I wanted to throw this up. This is something that came up on my news feed a couple days ago, from David Holden. We had a big wind event as well as a couple heat events come through the last couple weeks here in on the coast of California. I just thought David summed it up well on his social media post here. So I spent, yes, I'll read it to you. It's just in case you have a small screen. So I spent yesterday and today walking around about 100 plus lemon trees, counting fruit on the ground between treatments after the big winds Monday and Tuesday, where I have been testing both abiotic stress mitigators and soil cleaning products. Some are biologicals and some are conventional. In all cases, the product significantly reduced young lemon drop from this event, just as they had did after the 110 to 120 degree event in September, to the line. These are totally replicated trials, not just squint and look. So we didn't participate in any of these particular trials, but we have in the past with similar results, and we've seen that on block and field level, that fruit retention during stress is a big deal. The second it leaves the tree, it's not worth anything to us anymore. In fact, it's we're losing money. So just thought that was a timely comment of, there's a lot of tools on the market to help push retention of fruit as well as set, and we wanted to talk about those today with you. So that was an interesting transition. So so agenda for today. We're gonna start with a little introduction on who Redox is, and then we'll have a section presented on bloom and fruit set. Unfortunately, John Kelly's not going to be able to join us today, but Jared's gonna give those slides for him, and then quality and drop prevention. I'll give a set on those, and then we'll jump into a little discussion with Chris. Chris will help with that on some frequently asked questions in the field of kind of just frequently asked questions with some of these products we'll discuss, and timings and logic behind them. So. And that'll also be a time when, if you have questions or you want to have an in-depth discussion, you're welcome to join in the conversation, shoot over your questions. So just a couple housekeeping things to get things started. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to send them to us using the chat or the Q&A function. You're more than welcome to send them either way. We'll try and monitor those and make sure we get them answered in a timely manner. There's also a raise hand button if you want to push that to try and get our attention, but definitely shoot the questions over on that chat function. We'll get you an answer hopefully. And then if you're on a mobile device, if you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, you usually can leave the app and it'll keep playing the audio. So that's kind of a nice feature. If you need to go jump and answer some emails and you want to keep listening, it's still going to hopefully play in the background. So if you have a CCA license and you are looking to get hours out of this, please stay logged in for the whole time, and we will send you a follow-up email with the sign-in sheet that you can use to use your app and log your hours. So with that, I want to introduce you to Redox a little bit. So the purpose of Redox really exists to create passion and excitement in growing plants. And I hope we bring that to you today, some new tools, some new concepts to really fuel your passion for growing crops. We really are rooted in three key values: passionately authentic, creatively driven, and scientifically knowledgeable. I hope we bring those to you today throughout this webinar. And to put it simply, Redox is a bionutrient company that focuses on sustainable plant nutrition. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how do we feed our plants in a sustainable way that we're able to achieve our yield and production goals in an economically viable way. So With that, I'd like to introduce Jared Sanner. Jared is a grower and a crop consultant in the Central Valley of California. He has worked with Redox Bionutrients for 10 years, providing expertise and solutions for a variety of crops across California, really specializing in citrus and nut crops as well as table grapes. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Jared hop on here.
Okay, share screen. Here. See my screen? Somebody tell me
Yep.
yes, no.
Yep, I see your slides. You're good.
Okay, we good?
Yep.
Okay, so, well, good morning, everyone. I think it's morning, and most of the attendees, I saw we had some people who RCP from overseas, so I'm not quite sure what time it is there, but welcome. Danny, thank you for the introduction. So I like how, let me just look back here. I like how you pointed out, you want to make a practical approach. And so that's what I want to do. Just some practical tools tied with some agronomic principles to help push yield. And like you said, and there's no time bloom, that's what it's at. And once it's gone, it's gone. So a note on that I would say is get into a couple of things that we'll talk about today. Daniel covered a lot of quality. Let's take a step back. He'll cover a lot of quality topics that we should consider. I'll touch on some yield aspects, whether it's a setting, nitrogen metabolism, setting up that crop for success later in the season. As we jump into that, a couple areas to consider when we're looking to increase production. I like to look at it like we want to get that tree ready to put on the most viable flower, ability to set and retain, and move that, and then size and finish. That's happening right now, well before pre-bloom. It's happening as we're finishing on the citrus. Is just constantly going, different than some of the other crops that we deal with. But what we deal with here in the Central Valley a lot of times is we'll have carryover crop. Sometimes is on still before that pre-bloom period is happening, and the plant's getting ready for flowering. For whatever reason, market conditions, your packing house hasn't gotten your fruit, puts a lot of stress on that tree to have to deal with a crop and a developing crop coming, or bloom starting to happen, and the hormonal push that needs to happen within the tree and set to resetting to get your flower production going. And so that puts a lot of stress on the tree itself. So I want to just cover a couple principles of crop set, nutritional balance, and that crop size. When you look at crop set, you think about it, you look at that bullet point there, stress is going to increase during bloom, and you've got an immense metabolic demand. You've got different hormonal cytokinin, auxin, different ethylene, different hormones that are fluctuating and resetting within the plant to drive certain outcomes that are necessary. And one of the principles that we focus on at Redox that is foundational is the lack of key carbon compounds because of poor photosynthetic activity. That could be due because of abiotic stressors, could have to do with some nutritional imbalances. Weather obviously plays a big role in the plant able to convert sunlight energy into plant energy. Combined with that stress really can reduce crop set. So I'm going to try to address a couple of principles there. Nutritional balance. We work hard to get this dialed in. This is a constant work in progress. Every ground's different. Rootstocks are different. Varieties are different. And they have, whether you're talking mandarins, we're talking navels, valencias, everybody's a little different how you approach it. But that nutritional balance is key. And we want to ramp up our photosynthetic production so we can get those sugars and starches, and then that'll help us finish. And we need micronutrients to run that. Zinc's critical there. Manganese is a big one. We've got to have those in balance. And so to be on the higher side during critical stages of levels in the tissue is really important. We'll talk about a couple of those things. And then just lastly, that fruit and crop size. So there's some varieties where we do want to push and we want to get on that larger piece of fruit, depending on who your buyer is and what market you're going to. Some maybe that middle range of fruit size, but you want to finish, have good rind quality. You want to decrease that the puff or crease that some varieties want to have. So inadequate what we found is you're trying to push fruit and crop size, sometimes the slow of plant respiration, it'll slow down the bulking or the fruit size. So we have a strategy there, DICAP being one of them, to help us push that plant respiration, help us push potassium and phosphorus season long, so we get that fill and crop size and finish in a consistent way. So a couple of things I mentioned, one of these products I'll cover when we're looking at our crop set, and then I'll just walk into what those materials are. We'll talk about mainstay SI today. That's a 10% calcium, 22% silicon product. It is approved for organic use as well. That will really help on the quality side. So I'll push pause on that for a second, but I really want to focus on right now is Supreme. It's a 214-15, and it increases reproductive growth, and it helps facilitate nitrogen metabolism within the plant. And this has been a hallmark of our pushing crop set, size, and quality. And I'll walk in a couple ways that's been done. So let me jump to this slide here. It's on Supreme. You look at the analysis on it, you see it's a little bit of nitrogen from ammoniacal source. That's important. You've got nice phosphorus number 14, 15% potassium. You've got some boron, copper, iron, manganese, a touch of molybdenum to really help with that nitrogen metabolism, and zinc. So the levels of these micronutrients have been designed to really support good nutrition right at the, we use Supreme in California. We'll use it during that pre-bloom period, early bloom development, and then obviously during our bloom and post-bloom, we use it. And we found it's been a consistent performer for us in a variety of crops, but definitely in citrus, as we're focused on that today, to really increase this reproductive growth or encourage a reproductive response within the plant and not vegetative, which is really important in this bloom period. And then to help with the nitrogen metabolism, after we have fruit on, and we want to encourage the plant to continue to push fruit development, help retain that fruit and size it, and help during cell division. Supreme can be helpful there. One of the things that is a small little bullet point here that's important to point out with Supreme, it does have amino acids. It's complex and chelated with amino acids, humic and fulvic acid. But one of the critical things about Supreme is that it contains soluble carbon compounds that are derived from a proprietary fermentation process. And we take those compounds that have been fermented, we take those carbohydrates and react that into the product. And that drives a response within the plant to set and size. That's where that reproductive growth, reproductive triggers within the plant. And so as you take a closer look into that, what are those carbohydrates doing? What is this cycle that we're trying to push when we're thinking about nitrogen metabolism? We're thinking about increasing crop set. You take a step back and you think, if that plant was, a citrus tree, navel, you're grabbing sunlight energy, you're taking water, carbon dioxide, you're converting that into photosynthesis. And in that process, carbohydrates are formed, and that's just the energy that'll run everything. We create our amino acids, the proteins. At the same time, the plant is producing antioxidants to help deal with stress, to help run, whether it's the coloring, the different VOC, phenolics that plants are producing constantly to deal with this environment. We're really trying to crank that cycle and to move it adequately, that we don't get overstressed. We use materials to help mitigate. Danny talked about some of that abiotic stress and biotic stressors that are going to be constant. Trying to put materials in at strategic times to slow that stress on the plant, whether it's abiotic or biotic stress, so we can drive more carbohydrates, increase amino acid production, and that will, in the end, get us better consistent crops, whether size, quality, sugars, those kind of things. When you think about nitrogen metabolism, often we think about soil, and that is critical. The plant's grabbing majority, obviously of its nitrogen through the soil. And a couple points on that, I'll just summarize this, where we're using nitrate fertilizers, ammoniacal-based fertilizers in the soil. Those are primarily taken up. They're converted by bacteria. They're used there by our soil biology. But there's conversions that happen, whether it's in an ammoniacal form, they'll convert to a nitrate. Nitrate's obviously difficult because there will be leaching. So we do lose a lot of our nitrate because of the ability to move through the soil freely. So something that we want to look at and watch, particularly in California, we have to watch that. other states, I'm sure it's getting there. So we want to provide enough carbon in the system, whether in the soil root zone, to help the plant convert nitrate into a usable form. The plant can readily take up nitrate through the roots, and it'll put it in the plant. But the plant needs carbon, specific carbons, to reduce that nitrate into a usable form, to put it into amino acids. And that's what that plant cell to the right, that diagram is showing. When we have excess nitrate, and we have a lot of good fertilizers that are high in nitrate, they will drive growth, more vegetative growth. And at certain times of the year, that might be appropriate, or the age of the tree, that might be appropriate. But when we're really trying to push the plant into a more reproductive mode, we want to watch the amount of nitrates that are introduced into the orchard system or into our fertility plan. And if we are going to have a significant amount of nitrates, we want to make sure that we have adequate carbon or carbohydrates that the plant has access to and can move around and utilize those. So that stored nitrogen can be converted or reduced into a usable form, into ammoniacal form, into amino acids, and then ultimately into proteins, and the plant can put that to use. So again, just kind of walking through that. That's that plant cell that I talked about on the right. You can see that it's reduced into amino acids, and that's where a lot of internal stress, cellular stress, can happen when nitrate gets out of whack in the plant. The plant has to slow down or deal with that, and it's a carbon economy within the plant that if we don't have adequate, it'll slow the beneficial function that we want for reproductive and sizing and just bulking. When we have too much nitrate, it really comes at a cost to our other functions where proteins, amino acids are needed to help develop fruit and the fruitfulness year to year. All right, so just to round out that conversation on Supreme, there's obviously a lot of other nutrients. Sometimes we need more manganese. We have a triplex line of amino acids that's, a triplex line of micronutrients that are amino acid, humic, and fulvic, complex and chelated. Triplex micro, you'll see there on the right, that is a key product for us. Manganese as well, and citrus, and then you see our zinc, magnesium, phosphorus, P58, it's 58% phosphorus. So again, just to get you some exposure to those, if you're new to Redox, that's where that nutritional balance comes in. We want to make sure that that's a part of our program. So just a touch on quality. When you're thinking about nitrate metabolism, we shouldn't leave that without a conversation about DICAP. That's the only one I'll highlight on this slide today. DICAP's a 03150. And so obviously high in phosphorus and potassium. But what does it do? It increases plant respiration. And I want to just take a little bit deeper dive into that. So when you think about DICAP, definitely it is your source of phosphorus and potassium, your go-to source there. That's a given. But what it does beyond that is a bit of this abiotic stress defense or antioxidant production to help the plant deal with stress at critical times to really make gains. And one of those, when we're thinking about citrus, is you want to increase respiration at key times, definitely during bulking. That post-bloom period is where we find fits for DICAP. Occasionally we'll get it in on those pre-bloom sprays, but definitely after fruit is on and we're at early fruit and sizing is where we want to have steady soil and foliar applications of DICAP to really drive nutrition, but also help with this increased plant respiration. If we can increase plant respiration, we're going to utilize more of those photosynthase that the plant's been working on to drive size, to drive quality, and to finish fruit. Some of our varieties will use DICAP to get us on the early side of harvest, so we can get in on that earlier market, and we'll do that with multiple crops. That's been realized. And respiration, by increasing that, you can move incrementally towards that. So what are those things, some other things that it does for us? It'll improve stomatal conductance as well. So we talked about increasing plant respiration. We talked about increasing antioxidant production, obviously P and K nutrition, but that stomatal conductance, just a slide on that. When you think about it, potassium in those guard cells in that area within that stoma that opens and closes, the better potassium nutrition we have, the tighter and quicker that response can be. And our research shows that DICAP does help this ability for the plant to regulate the stomata and individual stomas. It can regulate those better so that CO2 coming in, oxygen coming out, the exchange of gas can be more efficient I guess is a simple way to say it, where lack of potassium, lack of plant's ability to maintain that regulation, it gets more leaky, we're just less efficient, and more stress can occur, particularly in periods of heat and cold. And lastly, on DICAP here, two more slides. I mentioned about that. We get this question a lot. So DICAP, you're putting antioxidants on with DICAP, and no, not really. What it is DICAP, the technology within DICAP actually increases the plant's ability to produce those antioxidants or those phenolics that help offset plant stress. They increase respiration, they offset plant stress, and with the P and K, you're driving that reproductive or bulking, sizing that we see the benefit with DICAP, heat stress, cold stress tolerance. And then lastly, the last slide I'll share today. So we just covered Supreme, the setting and sizing, nitrogen metabolism, and how DICAP can play a role in that. And when you take a greater look at, if you look at potassium in a sense in the soil, there's three different, just a quick review here, there's three different forms here that potassium is readily available in a solution form, and there is some exchangeable, but the majority of potassium is held in the soil and fixed. What we see on the soil sample is really, you can call it less than 10% of actually, really what's in the soil. And so there is a constant flux throughout the season from fixed K into exchangeable into solution K. And the solution K is the only one that the plant roots, solution potassium, can actually pick up and absorb. And so this is why we fertilize with potassium regularly and consistently, particularly in citrus. We do it in grapes. Any high demand potassium or fruiting crop that we deal with, potassium is critical because it is how water, nutrients are moved through. It's critical in dealing with heat and the plant keeping its turgor that's appropriate. But I guess the point I want to make with this is why we found good gains using something like DICAP. That's a soluble, consistent form of potassium, because we are constantly fighting water and soil chemistry for available potassium in the solution. And it's relatively small, and this exchange between fixed, exchangeable, and solution, we're at the mercy of the soil. So whatever we can do to improve our soil conditions to make that work in our favor, but also supplement with a soluble form of potassium is key. And that's where using 1 to 2 pounds of DICAP, depending on whether it's a foliar or soil, has been an advantage for us in driving good potassium and phosphorus levels in our trees and our citrus. So with that, I'll leave it. I'll pass it back to you, Danny.
Thanks, Jared.
You bet. Let me stop share. Give me a second here. I hope you couldn't hear that jackhammer outside the office. Did you hear a lot of that?
No. Maybe a little tiny background noise, but nothing distracting,
Well,
at least not on my side.
it was loud for me, so I'm glad it wasn't for you.
You presented through it well, Jared. I couldn't tell that you were highly distracted. So you guys see my screen? Good.
I can see, yes.
Fruit quality and retention. Okay, great. So let's go to the second half here of kind of the yield and quality discussion. And Jared did a great job presenting on this nitrogen metabolism concept and how important that is for fruit quality and crop quality in general. For this particular talk, I really wanted to focus in on kind of the bloom timings. And when we're talking bloom, set, and early fruit development, really it's fruit firmness and rind strength is really the concept I wanted to push forward. I know fruit firmness isn't something we usually think about in citrus per se, but it kind of all comes back to soft tissue, right? So if we have soft tissue that includes the stem and the calyx area on citrus, we're going to have a fruit that is more susceptible to stress. So let's zoom in a little bit on that. So the challenge is poor cell wall structure that leads to fruit that are more susceptible to stress and damage. And really the solution to that is calcium and silicon nutrition. So concentration and placement of calcium and silicon is essential for both cell wall strength as well as cell membrane function. And there's two things that are really important. There's concentration and then there's placement, right? So there's only certain periods during crop development, and especially for fruit development, where we can accumulate calcium into the cell. Calcium is used in the cell wall. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute, but we can only build it into the cell wall when we're building those cells. And when we're talking about fruit development, and kind of that calyx interface with the fruit, that is really all growing, and that vascular tissue is being established and built. At least the building blocks of it is really happening from pollination through that maybe first month of fruit development after pollination. So that's really our key timing, that we need to have calcium and silicon in the crop to make sure that we are having the largest return on investment for trying to influence crop quality going forward into what you would think of as fruit fill. So really, we use that term of kind of fruit filling or bulking. During that stage, we're really filling cells. We're not really building cells, we're just filling them. So the structure is already there, we're just trying to make them bigger. So that's a concept that I think is important here when we're thinking about this critical timing around bloom. Um, I've heard it a lot in in the colloquial, we'll put it that way, of, I'm not really going to figure out what I'm going to fertilize until I know how much fruit I'm going to have for next year. And I think that's really doing a disservice to the crop cycle, that we're actually losing a lot of yield, and we're just kind of being happy with what shows up just by Mother Nature, whatever she's bringing to the party in that timing. So let's talk about what we can do to kind of push that yield and really kind of push that yield potential from a bloom timing standpoint. So there's two products I really want to highlight: the Mainstay Calcium as well as Mainstay SI. I put triplex boron on here as well. Boron's crucial for crop set as well as for calcium assimilation. So if you are deficient in boron, none of this is going to work that we're talking about now. So make sure that that is taken into account in your fertility programs if you need it. Many places in California have excessive boron and never apply any, but there's other places that are highly leached and can have boron deficiencies, especially around bloom periods. I have a lot of places like that here on the coast, where we have high boron all year long, and then we get a bunch of rain, and then bloom comes around on these lighter soils, and there's no boron there anymore. And the crop needs to take up some boron from the ground to assimilate into reproductive tissue as it's finalizing its development, and it just doesn't have any there. So it's kind of an odd situation where 80% of the year we have too much boron, but the 20% of the year where we don't have any boron is when the plant actually needs it. So there's some time things to consider. So that's all I'll say about boron. But let's jump in here about calcium. So let's start by introducing this product. It's Mainstay Calcium. It improves calcium nutrition. It's a 20% calcium product. Improves cell wall structure, increases fruit firmness, and increases fruit quality. We do that through our microencapsulation technology that maintains availability of the calcium in the soil, so it prevents tie-up and helps with assimilation into the crop, allowing us to use very, very low use rates. It's also available in an organic formulation, which is very nice for our organic growers to be able to push quality. Like I said, so calcium is important in cell walls. So when we have lack of calcium in the plant, what we see is we get kind of a cell wall that will not hold turgor well. It will not be able to hold water in well. It won't be able to facilitate cellular function, which is a lot of what the cell wall does. It acts as a substrate for cellular function to take place, for things to latch on and do processes from. So when we have a weak cell wall, we don't have that strength. Now that, from a quality standpoint, is important because a lot of what we think about of quality, no scratching, limited damage from pest insects, or other pathogen issues, overall damage to the rind, all of that is really coming down to how tough is that skin and how good is it at dealing with stress. From a drop standpoint, we think about cell wall structure and the ability of that calyx to hold on to the fruit. That fruit will die if it doesn't have sufficient water or sufficient cellular processes during stress events such as heat events or wind events, when it can dehydrate. And when we have low calcium, that cell wall isn't able to keep water in, and that cuticle will be much smaller because it just hasn't built out the cuticle that it needs. So we have problems where stress will be much more impactful on plants that are low in calcium, especially on little baby fruit that are still developing. So when we add in calcium into the system, we get a stronger cell wall, a better cuticle, and overall a better functioning cell that's going to stand up to stress better. Now, the next step in that discussion here involves silicon. So silicon is a tricky element in crop production. It really fortifies cell wall strength as one of its major functions within the plant. In this case, Mainstay SI is a 10% calcium, 22% silicon dioxide product. Increases antioxidant protection, improves calcium silicon nutrition, fortifies cell wall strength. It as well is available in a organic formulation. And one of the challenges, however, with silicon just in general is that it ties up very quickly in solution. So most of our soils are made out of silicon. However, we don't get a whole lot of it available to the plant because it readily ties up in just the mineral structure of the soil. That can also be true for other silicon products on the market that are unprotected silicon. They tie up very quickly. So Mainstay SI, we use our microencapsulation technology to maintain availability of that silicon and calcium and get it into the plant. So you can see there on our left to the right, comparing kind of the availability and the tie-up potential. So what happens when we add silicon to this? We saw our weak cell wall when we're deficient in calcium and silicon. We have our good cell wall when we have sufficient calcium in the system. And what we've seen consistently is when we add silicon into that system as well, we really increase that cell wall integrity, and overall quality really pushes up, and the ability of that plant to deal with stress better is magnified to a very high degree. So silicon plays a critical role in just that cell wall structure and cross-linking and organizing calcium within the cell wall. And overall, it's that simple of a mode of action, if you want to call it that, of just building a better wall, makes things perform much better. So a few years back, it was great. We could say build that wall and everybody would giggle. So so I think that's still accurate here. We're building cell walls in the cell, and that makes a stronger cell. So let's jump into a field example. So these are Hamlin oranges down in Florida. We did Mainstay ASI to look at look at fruit drop. This was done with the Edentown Company. We measured late season fruit drop following 2 foliar applications of Mainstay SI. Now these apps were made during pre-bloom and during fruit set, so extremely early in the cropping cycle. However, we really quantified the results at the end of the cropping cycle. So very, very distant application timings. And what we looked at was the goal was to look at fruit drop. And we looked at fruit drop counts were taken on 3 different count dates. And we had the orchard floor was cleaned in between, so we knew exactly kind of what our drop looked like over those periods. We had about a 30% reduction in drop. Not all drop stops, right? There's still drop. The tree can't hold on to every piece of fruit. There's still some physiological limitation to that crop. However, with the application of Mainstay SI at a very reasonable cost of about $27 across both those applications, so you're looking at a little over 13 bucks on both applications, you're getting 30% less drop. So a very large difference in the ability of that tree to maintain late season fruit hold longer, so we get more fruit in the bins and less fruit on the ground. So, and you can see here that, September, October, November fruit counts. So that's pretty late in the season. So, and all of that really just comes back to this concept of having better cell walls. That calyx is going to hold on to that fruit a lot better. That stem is going to be a lot stronger. We see that a lot in an assortment of fruiting crops, especially in windy areas. I know Florida, you guys have plenty of wind events, and we get a lot of wind events here on the coast as well, where if it gets blowing really good, you're going to start seeing stems snap. Not necessarily calyx separation, but stem snapping. And we've seen Mainstay SI and Mainstay Calcium really help just build stronger stems that are holding those fruits. So we see less of that drop as well. So that is just that's pretty much what I wanted to emphasize here for Mainstay SI and Mainstay Calcium for fruit quality. I had a couple things to talk about and kind of skit rind quality and things like that, but I'll just say it here is that the same thing, same principles apply there for scratches and things like that in the fresh fruit markets, where we see just less leaf rub damage, less twig damage. You're not going to stop that sharp little citrus twig from really scratching up rinds if you have a lot of that, but the small rubbing damage we've seen, a lot of anecdotal evidence there of just better rind quality when these products are included. So from that, no questions for, if anybody's got any questions, please send those in. I wanted to jump into some frequently asked questions here, and introduce Chris Baker, and we're going to have a kind of an off no slides discussion here, just about some frequently asked questions. And this is your chance to ask some questions if you've got some to add to the conversation. So Chris is a Redox agronomist. He's the Southeastern Regional Manager for Redox, and extensive experience in citrus, turf, and pecans. He has worked with Redox Bionutrients for 11 years, providing expertise and solutions for a variety of crops across the Southeast. So that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so we don't need to see these slides anymore for this section. And let's see, that'll bring up everybody. And does anybody have any questions they want to throw our direction to start the conversation? I'm gonna start with one here. From that is a pretty normal one that we get to kind of start while you guys are getting your questions in the chat function here. So we talked a lot about calcium, and I'm going to throw this to Chris, I guess. We talked a lot about calcium. So, if I was a grower, I get a question like this. I have 2,000 pounds of calcium in my soil test. Why are you asking me to apply more? Right. That's a lot of the soils here in California and Florida or other citrus growing regions around the world, calcareous-based soils. Why do I need more calcium? So what do you got, Chris?
Yeah. So good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. So I've actually been peddling Redox products for almost 15 years. I've been on the Redox payroll for about 11 years now. So yeah, these questions of agronomics and the way we've done things for decades have always come up. Calcium, for one, we've always put out our lime or gypsum and assumed that those sources were going to supply us with calcium at the right time, in the right form that the plant can utilize for fruit set, sizing, whatever it may be. The reality of it is, most of that is that you're seeing on your soil test is more than likely, tied up with phosphorus or part of the soil structure, as those positive charges on that calcium molecule are actually satisfied by the soil colloid. So yeah, we see a lot of calcium on. And what we found with mainstay calcium is we're able to apply small amounts at the right time and get a plant response. And that plant response has given us those stronger cell walls, so on and so forth, as Jared and Danny were talking about. So with calcium, it's been a hard sell at first until we're able to do a demo. Prove the concept that adding calcium at the right time and a form of calcium that the plant can utilize at the right time in a small amount. We're talking pounds, not tons. So this has been proven, tried, proven again. Fresh vegetables in general, fruit, tree fruit, whatever it may be, adding that calcium source that's available to the plant at the right time has proven an ROI that's sometimes exponential. And SI also adds another to that return on investment. The mainstay SI product has become a part of that same concept, and getting a plant response at the right time. So our lime and gypsum applications are, or have their focus and goals of pH and water movement, things like that. Our mainstay calcium and SI applications are strictly for nutrition in the plant to stimulate a plant response at the right time. So that's kind of how I answer that question there, Danny.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's all about getting the nutritional calcium into the plant when it's needed, right? So, and I run into this a lot in 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 citrus and avocados where we have early bloom here in California. It's still pretty cold. We have a lot of calcium down there, but it's not really available, right? We don't have any biology that's cycling any calcium around. It's all pretty much tied up in mineral, um, yeah, and mineral soil at that point. And it has the potential late season to show up when the soils warm up and the biology is able to kind of break it up a little bit, but it's not there when we need it. So that's something that we see a lot here is where we have those key timings of those peak needs. It can really be beneficial, especially even on a foliar. I mean, the mainstay SI we did, that was all foliar, and we saw a great response there. So yeah, in a similar vein, I guess when we look at the Supreme product, a lot of the label, is micronutrients, right? When we look at the lines, and so why would I use Supreme when I have sufficient micronutrient levels in my tissue?
Yeah, there's a lot involved in this that I've come across in the last decade. Nitrogen is always a culprit in quality and yield, and the lack of. So when we think about these inputs, um, we look at labels. So Supreme is a pretty stout micronutrient package. And the growers that I suggest, Supreme or recommend Supreme, well, they already have good tissue numbers, so on and so forth. So how do I sell Supreme, or how do I recommend Supreme? You always have to go to what Danny mentioned in his presentation, the fermented uh, aspect of the carbon source that's in Supreme. So it's a combination or synergy of the P and K, the micronutrients, and these specific carbon sources that are helping that nitrate be reduced as it enters the plant. So this plant response that I mentioned before is the same concept. So this plant response that you get from Supreme is a consistent reduction of nitrate to get, of nitrate entering the plant to get into that amino acid chain, which is where the magic happens. Of nitrate, what we found is the plant has the energy to use, and what we found is this nitrate coming to the plant has to deal with it. So it has to make a decision on whether to put it in the amino acid chain or store it. So it gets stored in the older leaves, the vacuoles. So this is where the plant changes its mind and says, I have to use the energy and the carbon to reduce the nitrate to produce more vegetation, and it kind of aborts its reproductive ideas at that point. So Supreme, as it's added throughout the season from pre-bloom to trying to size up later fruit, it just does that nitrate reduction a little more consistently, so the plant can make multiple decisions, whether it's trying to produce more protein, more phenolic compounds. It just gives the plant more ideas and more solutions to make it do what it needs to do at that specific time. So whether you're putting a lot of nitrate products out there, calcium nitrate is one that I've seen that is more bad than it is good. But if you're using Supreme and calcium nitrate as your source of calcium, use Supreme. You're going to get so much better benefit out of that nitrate baggage that comes with calcium nitrate. So I think the bottom line is increasing the metabolism and the reduction of that nitrate so that you can acid processes and produce that protein for vegetation. I mean, for reproduction and not vegetation. So, that's the effect of Supreme. It's not just the micronutrients. It's not just the P and K. It's the combination and the reactive plant nutrient that Supreme is. Um, so.
Nice. So I got a question here from Dr. Bashart Ali Salim, and he's joining us from Pakistan. So thanks for logging in. He's got his question is I'm supposed to type, sorry. So his question is what dose of calcium silicon per acre on citrus? So with the Mainstay SI product, we're usually recommending foliar applications in that quart per acre range. So that's kind of our standard foliar. It'll go up to a half gallon or down to a pint, depending on application frequencies and need. But generally, we're around that quart. And a couple times throughout bloom is really the key timing that we're looking at. So thanks for that question. Let's do one more question that had come in here. How will DICAP make a difference in my P&K nutrition with only 3 or 4 pounds per acre? Jared, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit. Do you want to kind of reiterate that? I guess you got to unmute yourself though.
See that? That's always nice when you start just talking to yourself, and then Zoom says, "Hey, you're muted. Unmute yourself." So that's nice they do that. Or I've been going for a while. Um, so I would say on that, I would take a step back. Some of the yield gains that I didn't, as I was thinking about it, you're talking about this, where we use DICAP to help push our yield. So what's going on there? That 3 or 4 pounds, how is that? Yeah, that's not going to be your ultimate source. 3 or 4 pounds isn't going to carry the day for your total potassium or phosphorus, right? I mean, you're going to need to put more on. If DICAP's going to be your sole source of your P and K, you're going to need to be consistent, and you're going to be probably more upwards of like 15 pounds over the season if that's your only source. And I'm just throwing a number out. You can tweak that in depending on your situation. But where I use DICAP, whether it's a pound application, 2 pounds more typical, but there are some pound applications that go out frequently. Where I use it is where we are in our largest demand for growth. So during that sizing period, you can call it, where we're filling, we're still on the tail end of that. So we're just outside of some of the last DICAP applications. Now starting to cool down here in California. You're just finishing. We're really not running a lot of DICAP outside of when it gets colder. We'll run some to help with cold tolerance. But it's because of the efficiency, the 3 or 4 pound, you can't think of it as though you're putting on a potassium sulfate 3 or 4 pounds in the ground, and that's the same type of material. You're completely different technologies, the way that they're made. So efficiency is completely different. I would use it as to complement your potassium program, and with that respiration increase, it's going to be a multiplier. So yes, think of it as your potassium, but because the plant response is increased respiration, it will be a multiplying effect. And I can take a step back there. That's where shifting these sizes of citrus on the blocks that I've worked on with the growers is going from, more you're getting away from the small fruit to the medium, pushing into the larger sizes. It's that 5-10% shift into consistency and filling, like you're talking about later in the season. That's where some yield gains have happened. Now Supreme plays a role in that, but DICAP definitely plays a role in shifting those sizes. So less small, you're getting more than medium to larger fruit size, extra large. That's where the yield gains, and we've seen that not only in citrus, but across lots of different crops. It's a good one, and it's a pretty versatile one, DICAP, there to use for your particularly potassium needs.
Okay. I did see we had a couple people log on here that aren't necessarily in citrus growing regions, like up in Washington and things like that. We talked a decent amount about Mainstay SI and quality. So I'm going to throw this one out here because we get this a lot during Mainstay SI discussions, and this product's used comparatively in a lot of different markets. How is Mainstay SI better than calcium chloride as a foliar? Calcium chloride's used a lot in foliar formulations of calcium products. It's highly soluble. the burn potential is fairly low unless it's used at high frequencies, and I mean, calcium chloride really ran the foliar calcium market for a long time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how does main CSI really differentiate from that? I don't know, either if you want to take that.
Yeah, I'll say a word on that, and maybe Chris wants. I think, yeah, you're watching your chloride levels, obviously, the frequency of what you can do. Now, if your goal is to stunt a plant to keep it from producing vegetatively, or to control growth, because it could be that new growth could be robbing calcium from your fruit, then yeah, I can see that could be a part of the strategy. So I think for me, it's a balancing act. Obviously, the calcium there is available, but you're taking a step forward and a step back with chloride a little bit. Plants can deal with chloride a little bit. I just drove by, was it yesterday, on the west side, pistachio after pistachio, and seeing the burn and on the leaves from the season of chloride and salt. So there's a cost. Is there a crop on? Yeah. So for me, how does it differ? The You've got calcium, but then you've got silicon. And silicon isn't a negative; it'll drive antioxidant response and it'll help build cell walls. So to me, you're doing two different things. Just talked to someone yesterday actually using calcium chloride on the soil, and it's working for them in small amounts. It's cheap, and in small amounts at work, they felt like the chloride wasn't as negative. They started going higher rates, or you have a higher demand of calcium, then you start getting into trouble. So for me, it's a little bit of balance. I wouldn't throw it all out, but when you want to use it, that's where I want to dial in. And if you don't want that negative effect of chloride, then shift somewhere else.
Okay. Do you have anything you wanted to add on that, Chris?
Uh, what I've seen in permanent crops from pecan, the citrus, the blueberries, is that EC is affected, you know, with calcium nitrate or gypsum. You know, that EC and that root zone is affected tremendously, and the amount of just electricity that plant has to deal with, that root system has to deal with. So mainstay calcium at the low rates that we use, you know, there's almost zero negativity, and it's, you know, most of the time it's an exponential positive input. So just remember the conductivity in that root zone is it can go south very quick with you know, higher amounts of calcium chloride or whatever it may be. And I think on permanent crops, that's what we've seen the most as we've done when we treat, you know, several thousand acres of pecans, and they're seeing an improved root zone, you know, less negativity in the root zone. So those are some other things that Redox and the products and concepts are approaching inadvertently, and there may be a goal to do that, but you know, those are just some byproducts of the benefits of our applications that we found, you know, the years, especially in permanent crops, you know, where no tillage or you know, cover crops and all that are at. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth there.
Great. Thanks, Chris. So I had one more question come in. It says, is chloride toxic to citrus? As we have calcareous soils, how can we apply calcium chloride? So yeah, chloride is toxic to citrus, and it can be competitive with some other nutrients as well, and can be phytotoxic to the roots at high levels. So it is something we generally want to avoid, especially if you already have chloride in your water. And then so generally calcium chloride is used because it's cheap, but it's not necessarily one of the better calcium options. So it's a cheap way to buy calcium, but there's a lot of baggage that comes along with it. So mainstay SI and mainstay calcium have a much cleaner profile, and that's generally the direction we go to keep the soil as healthy as possible. So yeah, go ahead.
On a greater sense, we think of any, whether it's potassium, calcium, phosphorus, we see a lot. When you overwhelm the soil with any large rate of one of these, whatever material you're using, you got to think about that, and what are the consequences on something else, like an excessive application of calcium is probably going to be detrimental to your magnesium and potassium. I mean, there's just some things you think about. Even though something's cheap and we want to move it, what's what am I countering or creating an issue in the soil? With Chris's point about EC, that's a fine line that can swing and can take you weeks to recover. And at the wrong time, that can set us back. So it is something to consider when you're diving in. You find something you want to put, you want to address an issue. Large quantities sometimes do us a disservice than rather what we think we're doing.
Yeah, that's great.
There's another point, potassium chloride, I know here in the Southeast has become, the go-to potassium source because of price. With potassium sulfate, I think now has gotten up, fairly high. Input, and then you're using calcium chloride. So we kind of forgot that we just put out all that chloride with potassium. So we do get, some negative effects, even out of small applications of calcium chloride. So we just put out, 200 to 300 pounds of potassium chloride. So, keeping every input in mind and the negativity of it, and trying to alleviate some of those negative inputs. That's what we try to do. And there's always an opportunity there to be better in what you're putting into that root zone, for the sake of the tree, the plant, and the sake of the organisms and the environment of that soil. So
Yeah, it's a good point. So, all right, I think I'm going to wrap up the FAQ section here. Thank you for the guys that sent in, the people that sent in a couple questions. Really appreciate that. If you have more questions you want to follow up with us on, please reach out to us. I just want to reiterate this slide here that, Redox, I really like this. We really exist to create passion excitement about growing plants. We're trying to bring new tools to the marketplace to fuel your guys' passion for pushing yield and profitability. And I hope we brought some of that to you today and gave you some concepts to consider. I'd like to thank you also for this. Oh, I skipped a slide. Sorry. If you'd like to learn more about, we have another webinar next week. This one will be more so targeted on discussions around orchard establishment and new plantings. So Nick Lucchesi and myself will be discussing that. And we have a guest speaker, Jeff, from the Central Valley of California. I'm sorry, I didn't get his full name to put on here, but we'll be discussing kind of orchard establishment practices, obviously fertility practices, as well as some management practices, and how we can push that. We'll have 1 hour of crop management that's been approved for that, for CCA, if you're looking for those hours. And should be a nice discussion. So that's next week, 10 a.m. Pacific time on that we'll be talking about that on the 10th. So if you can join us there, that'll be great. If you're watching the recording of this, hopefully you can also find this recording. So if that sounds interesting. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. If you have any more questions, I'll hang out here for a couple minutes. If you want to type in any questions you might have to follow up, my email address is there. If you'd like to follow up with us, you can also find us all on social media or by contacting our head office, and they'll put you in touch with us individually if you'd like to talk to us. So yeah, thank you for joining in.
Thank you.
thank y'all.